live stream is coming through accurately, and we'll get started momentarily. So let's just make sure everything looks good in terms of audio, visual, all that good stuff. Okay, that's promising. Visual. Okay, so we are live. So welcome again to everyone to Dr. B Music Theory. I'm Dr. Christopher Brellox. This is going to be a shorter version. I usually do two to 2.5 hours normally. Unfortunately, this one's going to be a quick one, but it's going to be a good one. So stick with me. We had a number of requests over the last couple of YouTube live sessions for some Rachmaninoff. Sergei Rachmaninoff was a Russian composer, prominent in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century. Russian composer, actually moved to the United States and had some of his career here later on. A very well-loved composer in many respects, and we're going to take a look at one of his more famous pieces. This is the Vocalise. Now, the Vocalise was in a part of a larger set, and it was for voice, but without any lyrics. So it was all just like ah, just on an ah syllable or some kind of syllable. So it was wordless vocal. In either often would be done with piano accompaniment or with orchestra. And so someone also asked for the Vocalise, and since it's a beautiful, beautiful piece, we're going to talk about it. Rachmaninoff is one of my top 3 personal favorite classical composers. So this is going to be a pleasure to talk about. So let's get started since we don't have a lot of time. All right, so I put up the melody along with some of the lead sheet symbols for the chords that would go with it. This is something that if you want to, you can go to IMSLP, which has free sheet music for classical music, and you can get this. They have a couple different versions, so you might have to look through it. This one's in C sharp minor, as you can see, and you can go ahead and look at that music, and you can get a little bit more in depth in terms of how I came up with the chords and some of the subtleties that are not captured with just a lead sheet symbol. It's interesting when you analyze music. The different methods that exist have different pros and cons. So a Roman numeral analysis helps in terms of understanding the function and the overall shape of a piece. Lead sheet symbols certainly help with just quickly identifying what the notes are. But all of these systems have some minuses. And so really the best thing you can do is look at the actual sheet music. And you'll notice that we're just analyzing the beginning. For those of you, I mean, certainly analyzing an entire piece is very valuable, and I strongly encourage it. But if that's overwhelming to you, analyze the first 8 to 9 measures, and that alone will certainly give you some very useful information, and that's what we're going to try to get to the bottom of today. So let me just play for you a little bit of the beginning here, and I'm going to stop and start a lot. So we start off here with I'm sorry, something's rattling here. All right, there we go. We got, and then we have this melody and these pulsating chords, right? This is important. This is not going to be shown up with the lead sheet symbols. Let me just play the piano part for you. Actually, let me play the basic chords with the melody. And here something happens, and we'll talk about it. And then we get this very interesting chord here that we'll talk about. I'm sorry, that was not it. That was it. No, hold on. So the chord is here. There we go. And then we get this resolution here that's beautiful. So I'll just start with that much. So again, you should listen. There's so many beautiful recordings of this. There's a lot with, it was originally intended for a soprano singer, sometimes a tenor singer, you'll hear it. But there's so many arrangements out there of for cello, for clarinet. There's a lot of beautiful versions. Interestingly enough, and I didn't know this until I was researching for today, this piece worked its way into a 1999, 1998 pop song by the Pet Shop Boys called Happiness. What is it called? Happiness is like something like Happiness is Possible or something like that. But you can look that up, and it's kind of neat to hear this famous Rachmaninoff melody worked into a late 90s pop song by the Pet Shop Boys. So you can look that up too. So let's take a look at the harmonies and the accompaniment, which I'll kind of hack through for you. We start off with C sharp minor, and then we go to C sharp minor with B in the bass. Then we go to A major 7. So if we were to do a Roman numeral analysis, right, we would say that's a 1 chord. 1 with the 7th in the bass in minor as a descending bass line is common. So like a 1 4 2, you could say 1 4 2 to 6 major 7. So it's really when we get to that 6th chord that we realize that Rachmaninoff's harmonic language is going to have a lot more 7th chords than, let's say, Beethoven would. This 1 4 2, this is pretty common. You could say, oh, but there's a 7th chord right there, Dr. B. This 1 4 2 as a descending bass line in minor is pretty common. So that alone doesn't really signal something different harmonically than, let's say, Beethoven. But when you get to a 6 major 7, you definitely do. So let's hear that again. And you hear that 6 major 7. Now check this out. We have and this is where analyzing music can be a little complicated. You heard some things. It sounds kind of like non-chord tones. You could call them passing tones and anticipations, or you could analyze them, but there's a risk of over-analyzing music. So let's overanalyze and let's underanalyze and kind of see where we can meet in the middle. So if we look at what we have in terms of right here for just an 8th note, which is not enough to really call it, harmonic, like a harmonic progression. It's more incidental. But I think it's what's incidental is actually quite important. So if I were to analyze it, and again, these chords are not kind of in terms of harmonic function. You wouldn't say F sharp minor 6 to B7, but we go from and I think what's important here, here's the thing that I want you to take away from this. Very often when composers use non-chord tones, especially in this situation where they're all stepwise, the non-chord tones often create harmonies unto themselves. It's not like the non-chord tone is dissonant within itself. It kind of almost creates passing chords or incidental transitional harmonies. Now, when you look at that, this F sharp minor 6 to B7 all over A in the bass, this is kind of important because the F sharp minor to F sharp to B, that's circle of fifths progression. Even though it's not let's say, where we would expect it, we could say, well, that's a 4 chord and that's a subtonic 7. It's definitely not functioning like that. So Roman numeral analysis has its limitations, and this is going to be a piece that's going to expose many of those limitations. What's more relevant is root movement and kind of the intervallic bass note relationships. Of particular note is that this F sharp minor 6. So F sharp minor triad adding a major 6. So let me say that again. It's an F sharp minor triad adding a major 6 above the bass. Now, for those of you who are really thinking it through, you could call this something else as a triadic harmony. So F sharp minor add 6, something I talk about in some of my later lesson videos. Actually, not lesson videos, my after the lesson videos. I talk about add 6 chords. But if you wanted to just make it a tertial spelling, you would call this something else. I'm going to give you a split second to think about it, see if you can figure it out before I tell you the answer. But why not call it, instead of F sharp minor 6, I'm just trying to look for a free place to write it. I'm going to write it right here. D sharp half diminished 7. What's the difference? The notes are exactly the same. D sharp half diminished has D sharp, F sharp, A, C sharp, F sharp minor add 6, F sharp, A, C sharp, D sharp. Exact same notes. One has a different root. Why would I call it F sharp minor 6 and not D sharp half diminished 7 and then put it in the appropriate inversion? And the reason is that this root movement, F sharp to B, is circle of fifths and is very powerful in terms of how we hear things. So hearing an A root going to a D sharp, that's very dissonant. And then D sharp to B is not all that common. But A to F sharp, down a third, super common. F sharp to B. And when I say super common, that's not really the best way to say it. That's what the ear expects, which is why composers do it so often, because they're doing the expectations. And they're going to put in some unexpected things at certain points, but this is still the very beginning of the piece. And Rachmaninoff isn't trying to be super unexpected right off the bat. He's kind of building it up. Another reason why I'm calling it F sharp minor 6 and not D sharp half diminished 7, which is when I was analyzing it, that's the first thing I thought. But as I continued analyzing the piece, when I got down here, measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, measure 8, it is so clearly C sharp sounds like the root, and you have this prominent A sharp in the melody. So this C sharp minor 6 is set up. This minor 6 sound is very obvious later on in the piece. And you can see it, we come back to it over here, where we have an F sharp 6, major, and then we go to the F sharp minor 6. So here's how sophisticated Rachmaninoff is. These unusual minor 6 sonorities, those are unusual. He doesn't just hit you straight up with this, right? A chromatic note in the melody with this. He sets it up, and he sets it up so subtly that by the time you get to it, it sounds colorful, unusual, but it doesn't sound wrong. And for those of you analyzing music, just to understand it better, but as well as maybe compose, this is an invaluable lesson. How do you set up something unusual so that it sounds exciting and colorful and interesting as opposed to wrong? Because you could try to use this harmony and it could just sound wrong because it comes out of nowhere. Rachmaninoff, it's just an eighth note. And it feels like just a non-chord tone in the way the voicing works. So you're here on the A major 7, and he goes like this to these two notes. The E and the G sharp go down by step to the D sharp, F sharp, and then the C sharp moves to the B, which kind of gives you that B7, and then we are on our G sharp minor 7, which has that F sharp, D sharp, B. So it's almost like we're anticipating this G sharp minor 7. So again, super sophisticated, and it's these little subtle things. You could be like, Dr. B, why are you spending so much time talking about an eighth note? Well, this is the stuff that's really unique and interesting. And one of the things you can also do to understand the music is, what if you were to simplify it? What if you were to take out all that stuff and just play the A major 7? So you go, and I've got a rattling here. Right? So you just go. you could do it, right? This B is a little unsupported, or rather the D sharp rather is unsupported because that's not part of the A major 7. It's a little unsupported, so to a certain extent, maybe you just go to the, let's say just go to a B7 there maybe to support it a little bit, or you just kind of like allow it to go through. One of the things that you have is this A major 7 to the G sharp minor 7. That's, that could easily be parallel everything. You're just going down a step. So in order to avoid just the parallels of, let's say, the A and the E going to G sharp, D sharp, you put in these transitional harmonies, these non-chord tones, and it allows you to break up the parallel fifths so it doesn't just sound like a mass of things that's just slipping down. The overall effect is this sinking feeling of the C sharp to B to A is going to G sharp, to F sharp, to E, to D sharp. We're going to get to a D natural here, C sharp, and then finally when the C sharp goes down a fifth, it's the most amazing musical experience ever because you finally have this change, right? This bass line that was set up. And I'll just play the bass line with the melody. Oh, I'm telling you, I'm not doing it justice playing it here, but I hope you guys get the hint of it. When that C sharp drops down to F sharp right here, this is one of those pieces that will make some people cry and weep. It's that descending scale that finally goes down a fifth, and we've talked about circle of fifths and how that has this emotional resonance with the way we hear music. So when you hit that F sharp minor, and it's not just F sharp minor, it's F sharp minor 7, which again, when I was telling you, this colorful nature that Rachmaninoff is using with these minor these seventh chords, but he's doing it in a way, it doesn't sound like jazz when it uses seventh chords. There's a little bit of similarity, but remember that jazz got it from Rachmaninoff, not the other way around. The jazz musicians got these harmonies from French composers and Russian composers, and historically there was kind of almost like an exchange program between France and Russia in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. There was a lot of cross-cultural exchange in terms of composers. A lot of major Russian composers would come to Paris, and so the jazz musicians get these kind of French-Russian harmonies, but do them in a different way. So moving on, when we take a look at this, we got the G sharp minor 7, and we gotta cook along here. We get these pulsing eighth notes, and we do the same movement here to get to the C sharp minor 7 over G sharp. It's the same movement that we had here, which is why I put it in red, but it's doubled up. Instead of an eighth note, it's 2 eighth notes, 2 eighth notes, and the bass note changes here. But you still have that same voice leading. It's a repetition, it's a sequence, and it's important to recognize how valuable a good sequence is. So if we're going at the G sharp minor 7, 1 and 2 and sequence, variation on that sequence because the bass changes, and then right? So if we look at this and say, we got D sharp, G sharp, C sharp, F sharp. That's all perfect fourths stacked up. But what it sounds like is a G sharp 7 with D sharp in the bass with a sus4. Now here's where we get more sophisticated. We know that the 4, it wants to resolve to 3. So we could turn it into just a regular G sharp 7 in second inversion. Rachmaninoff resolves that note, right? He resolves that C sharp to a B sharp. But at the same time he does the resolution, he changes the bass note. So when I teach my students and I talk about non-chord tones, I always tell them, when you start off, make sure that at least at some point in the measure or in the beat or however long the chord is, that you have the actual chord. That the non-chord tones eventually resolve, and you can point to one section and say, well, there's my G sharp 7. What Rachmaninoff does, because he's got high-level music composition clearance that I do not give most of my students, he changes the chord so that the non-chord tone resolves as expected, but everything shifts underneath it. So what we have here is going to, sorry, that's not right. Going to, so we get the D sharp and a C sharp going to a D and a B sharp. And again, I apologize that I'm not able to put all of this up on the screen, up on the board here, but otherwise I lose all my melody stuff. But you can follow along, and the general concepts, I think, are what's most important for you to think about. That we have this, that G sharp 7 sus 4 over D sharp, and we move 2 notes down by half step, and it turns into a French augmented 6. And the French augmented 6 resolving as we'd expect it into the C sharp 7, and here we kind of we have that sus 4. So you remember how I was just saying this is F sharp minor 6 to B7, voice leading wise is the exact same kind of sequentially pattern that you have in the C sharp minor 7 over G sharp, F sharp minor 7. This sus to this sus, we have that, we have these subtle repetitions, these subtle sequences that again give the perfect blend of variety and repetition, such that it's interesting, but it has this sense of inevitable direction. This, when he resolves this sus 4, he resolves it as expected, right? So we have a little unexpected here, repetition of the sus sound, resolve as expected, and then finally F sharp minor 7, which is just such a magical moment. And that minor 7 sound is so beautiful. And then the melody, which was primarily, if you look at analyzing that, step, step, leap of a third, step, 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 leap of a third, step, 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 leap of a third, step, 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 leap, leap. So those 2 leaps in a row, the first time ever, you got the 2 leaps in a row. They're not big leaps, just leaps of a third. So this is all a very smooth melody. But the first time you have 2 leaps in a row going up, it just feels like the sky's open. It soars when you do that. When you have that moment. And then we get to the B7. Escape tone to the C sharp minor 7. Then we get to F sharp minor. And let's take a look at this D natural, right? You might be thinking to yourself, Dr. B, why is it that Rachmaninoff used a D natural when there's the D sharp in the key signature? And if he's doing this F sharp minor 6 sound, which has that D sharp, why wouldn't he maintain that? When you ask those questions, and these are exactly the kind of questions you should be asking, the best thing you could do is play it on a piano and see what it would be like if it was different. Let's see, how would this be different if we went from the F sharp minor 7 here That sounded good, right? It sounded fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it does feel slightly different than when you have the D natural. Let me play both of them back to back. This is kind of like This is the nitty-gritty. This is the stuff about music theory that's really interesting to kind of agonize and debate over a single note. Why D natural instead of D sharp? What's the effect? Because it's not an accident. Rachmaninoff did not compose things by accident. He did everything very purposefully. So let's see if we can understand why, what does the D natural do that the D sharp doesn't? I should point out some of the other things here, like this G sharp that's tied over, so that you get like a major 9 on the F sharp. So it's kind of like a retardation that you have that G sharp. This is going to be with it as written. And here's with the D sharp instead. So that D natural has more tension because it's outside of the key, and it feels like it has this little contraction, this tension, and it drives to the C sharp. If you think about the melodic minor scale, where it's ascending, it goes one form, and descending is another form. This kind of gives you that descending Aeolian feeling for a split second. And it makes it feel darker, more serious, more somber, whereas the D sharp, they both sound good. They both work. It's a subtle difference in terms of the mood. And remember, we're talking about music that is particularly sophisticated, meaning that the emotions it expresses are going to change. It's not like the entire piece feels one way. It's not like an entire measure feels the exact same as another measure necessarily. Like this kind of it's these subtle changes of emotion and feeling. One of the reasons that I love classical music is that my emotions tend to not be very simple. I can be happy, mad, sad, and hungry all at the same time. For most of us, life has enough complexity that our emotions reflect that complexity. The challenge is understanding how we feel about things when it's so complicated, where we have feelings where you love someone and they really make you frustrated. That's a complicated emotion, and that's fairly simple, right? Because it can get, when you put in how you feel about how you were brought up, and then now you're in a relationship now, and how that makes you feel, and there's things you love about them, there's things that are push your buttons from the past. Like, we as human beings tend to have fairly complicated emotions, and so what Rachmaninoff does so well is he gives us this complexity of emotion. I think this D natural is a great example of where that can happen and where that can get more tricky and more exciting, right? And then right here, this is a wonderful moment, right? So we have this 5-1 relationship right here, really good, and we get it again. This is so clearly a 1-6-4, 5-7-1, another real clear cadence. So in music, you don't want to have too many cadences, otherwise it's like it never feels like you get a flow going. But you do want to have some key anchor points. And you'll notice that this starts setting up, this is a clear cadence with like perfect authentic cadence. C sharp in the melody, 1-6-4, 5-7-1. You don't get any clearer than that when you talk about a cadence. And then we start doing this pattern again, the C sharp minor to the C sharp minor with B in the bass, but with a little differences, and we're going somewhere else. What's really neat here is a counter melody comes in, which is based on this. So the melodic writing is just so sophisticated. You start with your basic melody, and then you continue, that basic melody gets taken over, becomes a counter melody, and you get a new melody. So if we pick up on the C sharp minor, Okay, we're right here. We get this. And then you have the counter, the melody from before comes in, but it's at a different pitch level. You get. Right? That's what happens right here. You have that. Which is definitely coming up from our original melody. But the actual melody, we have. And you have that counter melody. And it and then it goes. Sorry. And we get to G sharp minor. Within that, we have some kind of like transitional harmonies right here, and we have one of the crunchiest harmonies. I like to use the word crunchy, where it's very, very dissonant. But you know, I could just play this, the simplified version. Remember, we talked about that. And we get this nice French augmented 6 chord right here, which has, let me just make sure I'm playing it right. But it's not where you would expect it to be, this French augmented 6. It's really with G sharp in the bass. So we're going to talk about this in a minute, and I'm going to spell it out for you. Let me do that right now. So there's a crunchy chord here I want to talk about, and then there's this French augmented 6 chord, which is G sharp. They call it C double sharp, and then you have B and the E sharp. So it's really like this is really like some kind of variation of the G sharp minor 7. So we have this G sharp minor here, and then the F sharp goes down, and then it kind of like steps back. Actually, the F sharp stepping down, it happens more above. So it starts to have another level where you have these kind of low G sharp. This happens a little above it, so I'm going to put this in parentheses. So you get this, and it kind of continues here with this French augmented 6. You get this. And it goes. So you just get that the G sharp and the B stay for G sharp minor. The E sharp is kind of like, you get this G sharp, E sharp resolves to the F sharp here, and the C double sharp, you're getting this kind of motion. So this use of a French augmented 6 sound, which he set up by using it exactly as we would expect, textbook, if you look at my lesson on French augmented 6 chords, it's exactly going into a 5 chord, exactly as expected. Here, he uses that sound, that sonority, but it's almost like a G sharp pedal throughout. And the French augmented 6 sonority, the sound, kind of goes from G sharp minor, shifts to the French augmented 6 with that G sharp in the bass, back to G sharp minor 7. That's a really neat, unique spot. Let's talk a little bit about this crunchy harmony. And I'm going to give you the letters here, because I was looking at this for a while. It's pretty crazy. We got G sharp. Again, this is all this kind of like G sharp pedal happening right here. We got G sharp. We've got D sharp. So that's a nice perfect fifth. And it's almost like if you think about the non-chord tone, the retardation, where you have the dissonance and then it resolves up. This is almost like the chord with like multiple retardations that then resolve up. You then get A sharp against a B, so that's a minor second right there, the B's there, a D sharp up above, and then a F double sharp. So the key notes here are the A sharp and the F double sharp. So you basically have a G sharp minor triad, G sharp, B, D sharp. And you got 2 notes that are definitely not in that chord at the same time. You got an A sharp, so here it comes, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, B natural, D sharp, F double sharp. On top of that, if that weren't dissonant enough, the melody is not any of those notes. It's a C sharp. So you get, that's so dissonant. And the melody goes, and then we get G sharp minor. Woo! That's a magical moment right there, right? So this A sharp, this F double sharp happening at the same time as your G sharp minor triad. So it's really G sharp minor happens right on beat 1, but you have this whole tension that resolves on beat 2. So rhythmically speaking, that's a little interesting to hear, okay, downbeat, you have this kind of this really dissonant harmony, and then you get the relaxation on beat 2. Last thing I want to say is that you can get this melody after you get that French augmented 6 here, and it resolves to G sharp minor. And you have another crunchy harmony here. And it sounds like surprisingly pretty. But that A sharp does not last for long. And I'll move my head out of the way, and we get right back to this minor 6 sound that was firmly introduced right here. So I hope this has been a good taste of Rachmaninoff's Vocalise and gives you at least an inkling of why this is one of those pieces that has withstood the test of time and has been performed many times in many arrangements for all sorts of instruments. You know, it's one of those pieces that's so unique and so beautiful that every instrument wants to play it, and they're like, hey, the singer's not singing any words, we don't need words, we're just going to play it on our instrument. And so lots of adaptions are out there. So go and enjoy this wonderful recording. You know, if you find a version you really like, come back after this is all over and put it in the comments and say, oh, I really liked, you know, the Bobby McFerrin Yo-Yo Ma version of the Vocalise, or I really liked this singer's version of Rachmaninoff Vocalise. So I'd be curious to see what some of your favorite performances are. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look here at the chat. It looks like we have a good number of questions, and I know I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to apologize because this is a short one. I'm going to end this in 20 minutes, so I'm going to move quickly. Hey, Gabby. Hello from Berlin. Hello from New York State, United States. The topic is Rachmaninoff's Vocalise. That's what we've been talking about. Jazz Hub, glad to be back. I had to miss one. EMZ, thanks for telling people. Thank you, Christy. You guys are the best. I love how we got a real helpful bunch here, and that's one of the things that's really nice about the Facebook page for Dr. B Music Theory. I'm not super involved in that, but I keep my eyes on it. And I can put reminders on when things are going to be. But that's a great place if you have a question. And some of you here, I see your names. You're really helpful to people when they have a question. That's a really good way to do it. Yeah, Ed, I agree. Lovely piece. Akash is asking for an easy way to spot mistakes in SATB writing. You know, I make the analogy to Japanese calligraphy or Japanese painting, where it's a very different stylistically than Western art, and a lot of it is about getting the shape right. So, you know, the drawing a bird in a more traditional Japanese style, it's not going to be like super detailed, super realistic. It's more of a gesture that implies flight and bird. And so the idea is to leave with most painting and most drawing, there's a certain amount that's purposely left up to the imagination of the viewer. And so this idea of practicing the shape of a bird, and you do that thousands and thousands of times until you're able to just get the right exact flow. I kind of think of part writing and voice leading kind of like that, where you just practice it over and over and over until everything, all the voice leading just kind of moves exactly the way you want. So when I look at stuff and I start seeing chunks of things like this, I know that there's a problem. So I'm going to erase a little bit of this so I can, and hopefully no one has a question on this part down here, because I want to answer that question, which is a great question. In the textbooks, the recommendation they give you to spot SATB writing errors is good, but it's really time consuming. But that's kind of probably what you need to do at the beginning, and that's simply to look at every possible relationship between the voices. So you say, I'm going to look at just let me do this the right way. I'm going to just look at bass and tenor. Then I'm just going to look at bass and alto. Then I'm going to just look at bass and soprano and see if there's any problems between the bass and any of the voices. Then I'm going to look at tenor and alto, see if there's any problems there. Tenor and soprano, see if any problems. And then finally I'm going to look at alto and soprano. So there's really 6, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's really, you're looking at it, you'd be looking at the example 6 times, but you're just focusing in on the only two voices at a time. And so this is really good, and you should definitely do this because that level of thoroughness will allow you to spot voice leading mistakes, especially things like parallel octaves, parallel fifths, parallel unison. You'll probably be able to spot any kind of augmented melodic leaps of an augmented second or a tritone. You should be able to spot any spacing errors or voice crossing errors. These are the types of things that using this 6 times through the same thing, looking at just 2 voices at a time, will definitely help you with. Now there's some other tips, because there's no way for me grading music theory papers I could spend the time to do this. It would just be an inordinate amount of time that's just not, unfortunately I don't have that amount of time to do that kind of grading. So what I do is I basically am looking for parallel motion. If I see some parallel fifths or parallel octaves, I zero in and make sure that they're not parallel. Like parallel fourths are going to be fine, but if I see a lot of things moving all in the same direction, I start to get worried, which is why I always recommend common tone and contrary motion when you're doing your voice leading. So I first look for any sections that have parallel motion. I then look at any place that there's leaps, because that's another place where you're going to find that it's most easy to make a mistake. So if there's a leap, especially like the bass is going to have a fair number of leaps. The soprano might have some leaps. The alto and tenor should probably have very few. I'm not saying 0, but anytime I see a leap, I zero in and look at that. And then anytime that there's an accidental, I'm going to look at that. And if I'm in a minor key, I'm going to be looking for accidentals. I'm specifically on a 5 chord and a 7 diminished 6. I'm looking for those accidentals. So you have the 6-point system of looking at each 2 voices individually, focusing on them, looking for the different errors. Then the quick version, and again, I'm not saying you should only do the quick version. I'm saying you should do everything. The parallel, look for parallel motion. Anytime things are moving in parallel motion, look for leaps. Make sure that there's not voice. The biggest one when you see leaps is going to be overlapping, where a voice, it's like each voice, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, has its lane. It's got to stay in its lane, and you can move a little bit to the left to the right within your lane, but you can't jump lanes. Right? You're not allowed to be a tenor driving in this lane and be like, you know what? I'm going way over the alto lane. That's overlapping. So when you have these big leaps, they can kind of jump into the other lane of the voice, which for the listener means that the ear gets a little confused because it's not easy to follow oh, look, here's the tenor. It's just driving its lane. It's here a little bend in the road. Here we have a little bend in the road, but they're staying in their lane. It's, you know, the melody moving up, it's moving down, but it's not cutting across 3 lanes of traffic to get on the exit. That would be my analogy for overlapping. And then finally, accidentals. In minor key, know what accidental you're looking for. I recommend that you just write whatever the leading tone should be. So if you're in A minor, you write the letter G sharp and you circle it next to the key signature so that you, as a reminder that if you get to a 5 chord or a 7 diminished 6 chord, that you need to raise that leading tone. Or if you're in C minor, you write B natural sign to remind yourself. Those are some of the things that I do to help spot SATB part writing errors in a quick fashion. So hopefully that helps. Oh, okay, we got a little clarification. All right, Akash. Practice part writing, it takes fair enough to do, but when checking my work, I generally take triple the time. Yeah, 6 times the time. It would be understandable, right? So that's so hopefully the idea to minimize that time is, again, I don't do this because you're right, it would take triple the time it did to write it. This is good to do, but you don't need to do it every time, and eventually you want to get to the point where you're like, again, this analogy of the Japanese artist drawing the bird. Like, they don't, after you've checked it triple time, 3-6 ways enough, you should understand like the shape of these lines. And when the shape of the line is a little bit unusual from what you've checked, that's when you have an alert. So look for parallels, look for leaps, and look for accidentals. And I think that should cut down the time. Good. Hey, Andrew, good to see you too. All right, Anoop, thank you for awesome content. Everyone, I recommend your channel to my friends. They say they love music even more. Hey, thanks so much. I'm really glad to hear that. And thank you for recommending the channel to other people. I'm astonished every day when I have new subscribers, and it just keeps growing and growing. It's wonderful. I'm so happy that people are enjoying it. And this is why I take requests and came up with this Rachmaninoff Vocalise. People ask for Rachmaninoff, people ask for the Vocalise. It's something that I love. I'm going to do it. Now, let me say that there's some people who've made some requests and they're in my to-do list. For instance, someone recently asked me to analyze Johann Sebastian Bach's St. Matthew's Passion. They even sent me some money to make it worth my while. St. Matthew's Passion is a giant oratorio, so a thorough analysis of that would take weeks of full-time work. So I'm going to try to figure out how I can, how I can move towards getting something that's going to be valuable for that request. And keep in mind, the other thing I'm always doing is I'm filtering it through my expertise and my interests as well. When I conduct an orchestra, I always conduct pieces I love. Actually, that's not 100% true. That I like, at least like, if not love. So sometimes people say, oh, Dr. Brolox, could we do this piece? And I say, it's a good piece, but I personally don't really love it or really enjoy it. And when I'm doing a performance with an orchestra, it's, this is where personality comes in, and where it's all right to have strong opinions, especially if you have knowledge to back it up. And so when you send me your requests, part of that is also coming through. So Rachmaninoff, Vocalise, I love it. We have a winner, folks. So thank you, Anoop. I appreciate it. All right, we got another question. I use alphabet letters, which makes it easy to check for mistakes. You can easy spot per. So DJ is giving an answer to Akash, which I think is a good one, about using the letters of the alphabet to check for mistakes. You can easily spot perfect fourths and fifths and octaves and common tones and chord inversions. Yeah, that's a really good tip. Like, some people work really well with the lead sheet symbols or just jotting in the letters very quickly. So they're like, oh, yeah, C sharp, E, G sharp. Good, I got it. Right? And so you can use that to kind of help your brain put all the pieces together. So good tip, using the alphabet, using the letter names to help spot errors. Ed is asking, could it be thought about as two layers of chord progressions overlapping together? So Ed, I'm not 100% sure. I assume you're talking about the Rachmaninoff Vocalise. Yes. Oh, I think you're talking about the part I erased here, where you have the retardation kind of chord. And yeah, that's a great way to think of like the retardation or anticipations. So when we're talking about non-chord tones, especially, and I'm gonna erase some more here so I can make sure for my visual learners out there, we can get some information up here. So the idea of a G sharp minor triad at the same time, because this was like another harmony overlapping it at the same time, and I guess what harmony would that be? If it's like, let me see where it's coming from. It's coming from like an E diminished 7, which has a B flat and a G, and these are the two notes that kind of get pushed over. So at this one moment, this is in the Rachmaninoff. For those of you who are going to look at it down the road, I'm talking about measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Measure 9. So this is measure 9 of the Rachmaninoff. It's a G sharp minor is the new harmony, but the old E diminished 7, and it's written enharmonically as F double sharp diminished 7. So buckle up, folks. F double sharp diminished 7. Enharmonically, that ends up being, they call it an A sharp and an F double sharp. And that's the way they write it, which I guess makes more sense. And this is why I should write it the way Rachmaninoff wrote it, because, you know, he's a genius and all that. So they had it as F double sharp diminished 7. And the reason that's valuable is that it shows you that the A sharp, it shows you the direction of resolutions. A sharp goes up to the B, the F double sharp moves up to the G sharp eventually, but not at first. So I think you're making a really good point, Ed, that it's like the F sharp diminished 7 and the G sharp minor triad are overlapping for a beat, and they kind of get pushed together. And that's a really that's how you make those crunchy harmonies that are super, super dissonant, but they don't sound bad. They just sound dramatic or intense. It's how you set it up, and it's how you resolve it. And certainly Rachmaninoff was one of the best. So really good point, Ed. I really like that. And I don't know if I've ever framed it that way, as that the chords are overlapping. So that's kind of like a new way of thinking of it for me, but it's 100% true. So I appreciate that. Hey, Elton. Oh yeah, Chega de Saudade by Antonio Carlos Jobim. Whew, yeah, the American version of the title lyrics are called No More Blues, and Antonio Carlos Jobim is a Brazilian composer who really founded bossa nova. So No More Blues, yeah, that might be one to put on my list. I love that song. So you picked a good one. All right. 1-7, 1-4-2, 6-7, 4, 5-7 is using the relative minor and the relative major chords of C sharp minor. I agree. It doesn't really start on 1-7 though, right? Because there's no B right off the bat, so it really starts as a triad. So let me just clarify a couple things. I think you're generally on the money there. But I think it's 1, not 1-7, because there is no B there. And that's important because he's starting with like a basic triad. He doesn't start off complicated, but he immediately starts making it more complicated. Then 1-4-2, I agree 100% with that part. And then 6-7, but I would write it as an uppercase Roman numeral because it's major, and I put the capital M7, so I'd write it like that. But you got the right idea. And then remember 4 is minor, so this would be 4. Again, this might be overanalyzed with an add 6. But I don't think you can call the next thing 5/7. This is just more. This is not a Roman numeral. You know, it's almost like this is 2, add 6, 5, 4, 2 of. This would be of 3. These are the 2 eighth note chords. So it's like a secondary function almost. And then we go to 5/7. Not uppercase, lowercase 5/7. So we're kind of playing a little bit here. When we talk about 3, this is your relative major. This is E major, right? So I think you're making a good point that the relative minor and the relative major chords are definitely being employed. So there's a little slipping back and forth between E major and C sharp minor. So that's another good observation. Andrew, I love these little details too. These are the things that make music really unique. So speaking of unique, I see Ed says, yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Ed. Ed writes this, and I agree with him. Focus on these subtle details is very helpful. Now I'm starting to understand how Rachmaninoff created his unique sound. Yeah, it's right. Rachmaninoff doesn't sound like Tchaikovsky. They're both Russian composers. They're both amazing. But Rachmaninoff has Rachmaninoff sound, and it's those little details that I was just starting to like uncover that makes Rachmaninoff Rachmaninoff. And that's the thing, is like when you start getting to these harmonies, you could say, well, what if I did the simple version? And this is something that you don't really, I don't see a lot in music theory textbooks. Kind of Schenkerian analysis does this from a harmonic standpoint, where they basically turn everything into 1-5-1, and that has some value in terms of understanding the large formal structures of key and tonality. But on the smaller level than that, just to simplify the harmonies and say, well, what is it that you're getting by adding those little details? So Schenkerian analysis does this a little bit. So I should rephrase it. We do have some theory books that talk in this way. But I think that's a great way to just play the simple version without the special non-chord tones or whatever, or passing harmonies or incidental harmonies. And then when you have put those details in, that's what makes Rachmaninoff Rachmaninoff, those little details. Because everyone, it's not like Rachmaninoff invented 1, 1, 4, 2, 6. Like, this is nothing original. So it's that blend of something that's kind of a common shared vocabulary of all composers with these little details that makes it uniquely their own. Alrighty. Yeah. You're doing some great analysis there, folks. Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of. All right, wow, we got an international audience here today, which always makes me happy. Hey, folks. Oh man, I'm not gonna get too much. You guys are doing great in the chat, kind of sharing what you're observing, which I think is awesome. I'm gonna wrap things up shortly. Underground D asking about My Foolish Heart, Bill Evans. You're talking my language again right there. I love Bill Evans, probably my favorite jazz pianist. And My Foolish Heart is gorgeous. I'll add that to my things of that I would like to get to at some point. So everyone, I know this was a short one. Normally I like to answer a lot more questions and get a lot more in depth, but I have some other obligations today. But I didn't want to miss, because I missed 2 weeks ago, so it's been a month since my last one of these, and I didn't want to go longer than that. So even if this was a short one, I wanted to kind of make it worth your while. So go out there, take a look at the Vocalise, and if you could, I would love to see what you all think of what's your favorite version or versions, and put that in the comments. And I would love, I'll read those, and I'm always curious to see what resonates with people. So thank you, everyone. I plan on being back in 2 weeks, same time, same place, 1 p.m. Eastern. Hope you can join me. Thank you, everyone. Go listen to some Rachmaninoff.